Good evening, all, and welcome to Calbarter's Corner, this second episode of What Makes a Knight. I am Lord Calbarter Guyler, Companion of the Meridian Cross, Companion of the Argent Comet, Companion of the Argent Lamp, Companion of the Falcon's Faith, and Reaper, coming to you live, as always, from the beginning of the Osprey on the southern coast of Meridian. Now, for this series, I am joined by an SCA legend. You all may know him from the SCA Coach's Corner, or from the fighting fields of Artemisia and the known world, Duke Sir Sean Kirkpatrick Tarragod. Welcome, Your Grace.
Greetings, everyone. As Cal mentioned, I am Duke Sean from the Kingdom of Artemisia. I have been a knight for 33 years now, and in that time, I've had a lot of discussions about what it takes to be a knight, and I've seen many a knight candidate come through council, and I've been witness to how some of those conversations have happened and how they have evolved and changed over the years. And tonight, I am honored to have as our special guest, a friend of ours from the West Kingdom, Sir Robert of Woodsend, Viscount of the Mists. And so, Robert, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. As Sean said, I'm Sir Robert of Woodsend from the West Kingdom. I've been a knight about 36 years, a little coming up on 37, not too far down the road. Spent most of that time in the West Kingdom. I did live in the East for almost 2.5 years back in the mid-1980s. And as Sean said, I've sat in councils for all those years, West Kingdom, East Kingdom, a couple occasionally invited to other councils. Again, so we had lots of discussions on what goes into being a knight and a good knight.
And one of the reasons that I'd asked Robert to join me for this particular episode on franchise. This is the part where I might embarrass him just a little tiny bit, but hopefully not make him run off screen. When you talk to anybody from the West Kingdom about the knight that they want to be, it's always Robert. He is a national icon in the West, and it is the epitome of what it means to be knightly, and it is because of that reputation, for the most part, that I definitely wanted to have him as part of this topic. So, Cal, would you like to give a brief overview of what the topic is tonight?
Sure. So, So I think you gave a great little run in there, and I want to agree with you. Every time I've talked about this show in general, Sir Robert just came up every time. And they're like, "Oh, you're going to what makes a knight?" If you talk to Sir Robert of Woodsend, I'm like, "Yes, he's on the list. We got it." Right? So tonight's topic is franchise. We talked about this a little bit in the last show, sort of the general topic, and this is a weird topic for the SCA because it is both the virtue of franchise that is really what a lot of people talk about. We're going to talk about a lot more of the practical application of it. So in the last show, we talked about the definition we're using for franchise is there's prowess and there's franchise. So prowess is your skill at the thing for whatever peer you are, skill at the thing. Franchise is everything else. It's those peer-like qualities. It's your interactions, your relationships. It's the rest of it. And that's a little bit what we're going to talk about tonight. So let's jump into that. John, what's our first sort of thought of the night for that?
Yeah, so as he was saying, we talked about it last episode that franchise is, to me, you have the prowess side of it, which is one half of being a peer, and that's simply because it's not that is more important than everything else, but prowess is a defining characteristic of each of the individual peerages. That's what differentiates them, and that's what you have to kind of, specialize, if you will, in that to be recognized for that particular peerage. But franchise is the entirety of the SCA in addition to that.
Right.
So, it is everything there. And Robert, I'll hand this off to you to kind of see if you have a similar or different definition for it.
No, I definitely agree with that. It's sort of a culmination or rolling up of all the other virtues. But interestingly enough, so when you invited me, Sean, to be on this program, my wife and I actually, at her instigation a lot, actually started doing a little searching into the history of the word franchise and where it actually came from. A lot of us think about, McDonald's these days. You have a McDonald's franchise. That use actually did not come into play until the late 19th century. Actually, the first one to use it was actually Mr. Singer of sewing machine fame. he made franchises. But the word goes back to, about 1300, early 14th century. And it carried with it the connotation of a lord granting privileges to somebody. Frequently townspeople. I grant you, the right to set up shop in this area. And so to me, that was interesting that it came back immediately to that sense of the nobility, and that they had the franchise, the ability to give the franchise, to give the freedom and the rights to other people. So one thing they called it the freedom from servitude and restraint.
Yeah. So basically, if you're a blacksmith under that lordship, when you associate your name as a blacksmith with that particular lord in that particular town, you are using their franchise and their reputation. And you're saying that I am the blacksmith for that particular lord, and people know that has a certain association with it.
Right.
Yeah.
So which brings up an interesting point too. I know Sir Helga talks about this a lot when she's doing any of her nightly talks, of the idea of franchise being almost a currency, right? It is the thing that is sort of spendable or loanable, I guess, and that it is, so if you as a knight, even say, oh yeah, that guy's good or that guy's bad or whatever, your franchise now affects that person. So by being on this show, you have added, you're loaning your franchise to me and to this channel, right? And now obviously to you as well, Sir Robert. Like it's a thing. Right. So that becomes sort of franchise being a commodity.
And that's how that gets into the franchise being made up of the other virtues we talk about sometimes, because that's sort of renown. And so you build renown, you spend renown, you can lose renown or negative renown, as it were, infamy. So you can build it up, you can lose it, and you can lose it a lot faster than you can build it up typically.
Yeah, easy. Well, and you both mentioned it at points, the idea of the McDonald's franchise, right? And that's one of the ways that one of my lineage, Sir Bartholomew Hightower of Canterbury had described it as well. And one of the things about that type of franchise is there is an expectation of what knightliness is and what a knight is, and looking at it specifically from the McDonald's perspective, you don't go to McDonald's because the food is really good food. You go to McDonald's because everywhere you go in the world, you're getting exactly the same thing. You know exactly what you're getting. A Big Mac is a Big Mac everywhere you go. And while
in Germany they sell beer in the McDonald's, I like that part.
Yeah, and there's a certain quality there where there's a certain given set of expectations based on what the overall brand is, but at the same time, each of those franchises are individually owned, and everybody is going to have their spin on it. Every McDonald's owner is going to have different colored seats and different trays. And there's a lot of things that they can do to personalize it on their own, and to kind of make it your own. But you're right, it is that greater association with a concept, and for us that general concept is knighthood and knightliness, and what people can expect.
Right. What they should expect when they approach a knight. They should expect the courtesy, someone who can teach them things, how to fight, how to be a peer. There are certain things you should expect.
Yeah, and at the same time, one of the other ways that franchises always kind of touched me is the idea too, that franchise to me is the difference between doing the things that knights do and being a knight. And I can tell you that took me a while to figure out, because I was knighted before I went in the military, and then while I was in the military, I was kind of hanging out, doing my stuff, and it wasn't until I got out 6 years later that I remember very clearly setting kind of a quest for myself to define what what knightliness meant to me, and basically finding my franchise. And and it took several years before I really kind of figured out what that was for me. And then looking back on it, that's when I came up with the idea that it was, yeah, it's the difference between doing stuff that knights do and actually being a knight. That thing we talk about all the time about, you're not a knight on the weekends, you're a knight every day of the week, and you just happen to display that on the weekends. But when I was a young squire, I did the things that my knight taught me to do, and many of which we're going to be covering in a variety of these episodes. And it was the arts, and it was the gaming and the dance and the heraldry and the being conversive in medieval topics, and those sort of things, and autocrating events and holding offices. And there were all these things that I did because my knight told me that these were knightly things to do. I never did anything for the sake of getting knighted, right? That was never on the table. Right. Brian said, these are knightly things to do. I'm like, okay, let us do knightly things. And so I was doing these things all for the right reasons because my knight told me they were knightly. But at the same time, it took me a while before I really understood doing those things as a means of being a knight.
And I would say too, that is one of the hardest things sitting in council discussing candidates, is to figure out, is a candidate doing these things simply because they think it will get them knighted?
Right.
Or are they doing them because they want to do them? And
because they're knightly things to do.
That's doing it for the knightly reason. Do it because you want to do it. That's what I tell my squires. Be interested in these things.
Yeah.
Do it because you want to do it, not because you feel you have to do it, not because I tell you to do it. And so it becomes more of them coming to me. I want to do this thing. And I say, sure, that's great. Or I say, well, maybe let's do something a little different.
Yeah.
That's a conversation so I'm a protege, and that's actually a conversation that Sabella and Dame Sabella and I had when I was first talking to her about becoming her protege, was because I'm a heavy fighter. So she was like, well, why do you want to be my protege? What's your path? Right. That was the first question that anybody asked me, what's your path? I was like, well, I'm a heavy fighter. I'm also an artist, and I also do service. And so, is my goal to become a knight? Well, yeah, knights are cool. I want to be a knight. That's a neat thing, right? And that's the next topic, is the wanting it. But I don't want to be a knight just to be a knight. I want to be a knight because I want to be knightly, right? So that was my goal. I told her, I was like, look, my goal is to become a peer. My goal is to be a peer. My goal is to be a knight, not to become a knight. My goal is to be a knight, to be knightly, because that's just the thing you should do. Right? It's the person you should want to be. So I think that's a really sort of an approach to peerage in general, is if you sort of, and I hate to, I guess, put knights on that pedestal, but you almost kind of need to, is if you put those knightly virtues and the idea of being knightly as the goal, whether you're an artisan or a service or an in-person or a rapier fighter or a heavy fighter or a siege engineer for that matter, if you act in a knightly manner and you strive for knightliness, right. First of all, there's nothing bad about it. I think that's the really thing, is there's no negative to it.
Yeah.
I always tell people, there's nothing wrong with wanting a peerage.
Right.
It's how you go about doing it.
That's our next episode.
Don't let that be the driving factor behind it. So when I started in the SEA, I did not, especially when I started the heavy fighting, my goal was not to be a knight. It was not to win a crown. It was not to be a duke. I set more open-ended goals for myself. So my goal was to become a good enough fighter that no one would take me lightly on the field.
Right.
And that's an open-ended goal. I'm still working on it. So you can keep doing that forever, because there's always somebody out there.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that idea of franchise is the drive to be knightly, right? Not to get knighted, but to be knightly. and if your goal is to be knightly, and more again to more the being a knight rather than just doing the things that knights do, and then the trappings of state that go along with being knightly just kind of end up getting presented to you at some point.
Right.
And I don't say that to diminish in any way the belt chain and spurs. I mean, they're all very, very sacred to me. But I think a lot of my path early on was eased by the fact that I was doing things that were knightly to do, but I wasn't doing them to get knighted and to get a thing. And that's kind of how I've always looked at the at franchise. And and I know it took me a while to make that distinction between the two. And I think a lot of knights go through that. I think there's because in a lot of respects you're doing these things because your knight tells you that these things are knightly things to do, and you trust them to give you that guidance. But it takes you a while after that to figure out what it means to do knightly things for yourself.
Right. So we had a comment. Actually, I have two comments. I'm going to address them from the comments here. So Viking, I think, is a good description of this. As a nobody, I was taught that it's not about becoming a peer. It's being recognized as having established yourself as one. So the idea of being there is that the goal is not to be a knight. It's to just be a knight. Right.
It's said many times in many councils that we do not make knights, we recognize knights.
Right.
And it goes back to what Sean was saying. You're just striving to be knightly. And if you do that, eventually you'll be recognized once you reach a certain amount. A slight counterpoint to that is if anyone has read Sir Vitus's Anvil of Virtue, I like that. This little book a lot. It's a good modern take, SCA take on knighthood. And his take on that is, if you're a squire, he says, do not attempt to be a knight. Be the best squire you can possibly be. And then when you reach the point where that is crossed over into knighthood, you will become a knight. He makes a sharp distinction between the squire and the knight. Right. To me, I don't know if there is that sharp distinction, because like Sean said, this is how you live. I'm not me any different than me on the field and off the field, weekends, work, things of that nature. This is just who I am. Other people are different. They put on a real persona when they go into an event, and it may be very different than who they are mundanely, who they are, the rest of the time. I am just me.
Right. Yeah. I always made the joke of, like, you're a knight in the shower, you're a knight when you get up in the morning, you're a knight when you go to bed, you're a knight on the field, whether you're wearing the spurs or not. And if you wear your spurs in the shower, then more power to you, but you're about resting, I guess.
What I try to tell people too is develop a passion. Right. I was always a history buff as a kid. I loved history, archaeology, all that stuff. I just loved reading about it. It's not what I went into professionally, but it was an interest of mine. And if you have an interest in things of that nature, so that means you're going to read about the time period you're interested in.
Right.
You're going to look at the things you have around you and say, how can I make this better? How can I, I started with this, it was cheap, it's what I could afford. How can I either make it myself and make something better? Or now I've saved up a little money. What do I want to get? That's going to improve how I feel about how I'm playing the game. And that you feel better about it. It lends itself out. Other people see that, they feel that.
Agreed.
Yeah. And the idea of doing things to get knighted puts us in that space where we're jumping through hoops, thinking that we have to do all these things to get knighted and to get the thing, and when we do that, we're not doing them for the right reasons. We're not doing them for the love of being knightly. We're doing them to chase a thing and to get a thing. And I've had several of my squires at some point where I said, well, you got to kind of venture off into some of these other things, but I had one of my squires who actually will be joining us for one of these episodes that, it's like, take up an office or do some service or do something. And there was never really the service geek thing, just never really grabbed him. But it turns out he's a graphic design guy. And so he started doing calligraphy. And next thing you know, he's kind of the go-to guy that people want him to make their scroll for their thing, and while I told him he had to find a thing, it still has to be a thing that he wants to do.
Right.
He can't do calligraphy because I say do calligraphy, and it just turned out that that's happens to fall into his mundane profession. And he made that connection and was able to do something that he was genuinely passionate about, and it was an art that he became exceptionally well known for, rather than just dabbling in a thing. It was like, this is your go-to guy. And otherwise, if you're doing a thing because somebody says you have to do the thing to get knighted, that's the wrong reason to be doing things.
Not a checklist. No.
Right.
It's not a checklist. Yeah.
Which I think is one of the hard parts for me is that there's not, like, we looked last week at sort of what Kapora said of, here's a general framework of a starting point, right? Cool, we got that. But yeah, past that, there is no checklist. There's no like obvious road.
Yeah.
I think that's the hardest part about being a knight in the SCA, but sort of, I guess, being a peer in general, is that there's no obvious checklist. So,
and nor should there be.
Oh, agreed.
Yeah. I remember in the early days when I was sitting in council, there was a lot of sort of talk about, does he dance? Does he know a lute from a flute? Can he blazon arms? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Does he know a lute from the flute is my favorite phrase ever now.
Yeah.
And but today I more term it, is this candidate, a citizen of the SCA?
Yeah.
However they participate, do they participate? Or, do they show up, throw on their armor, fight the tournament and leave, or fight the battles and leave?
Right.
That is not being a citizen of the SCA. You've got to have some interest outside of when you're not in harness. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
But then again, the interest shouldn't be, it's a giant cocktail party in funny clothes.
Yeah. But that is part of it, though. I think participating in those parties is also part of that, right?
It is part of it, but it shouldn't be your driving reason for being there.
Yeah. And I think at the time that I was a squire coming up, there was a lot more emphasis on individual parts, the gaming and the dancing and the arts and do you know a lute from a flute sort of thing. And I think that has changed over the last 30 years for sure, in the society where, I think now we tend to look more at a sort of complete package, and we kind of look more like Robert was saying, where you look at somebody and you say, like, they either have it or they don't.
Right.
And they don't necessarily have to have displayed all of the individual parts for you to know that they have franchise. In fact, we had one of our knights councils one year. We had one of our knights that made a statement that was just classic, and it was, yeah, that guy's got franchise coming out of his ass. He just rides around on a jet of it. Like, well, I guess that answers that question. Like, I guess he's got that part of it down. Now we just got to wait for him to up his fighting a little bit. But it's just one of those things where I think we can look at somebody and we can recognize that they're knightly, without having a checklist, and without, does he do this, and this? And I think there are ways that people can display those things without, without necessarily having to kind of go through that list, if you will. And the reality is, SCA events have kind of taken on a different shape and a different life, wherein, one of the problems that we have as an order, I think, is we don't provide a venue for people to display knowledge in those things. We expect them to be knightly and to have franchise, but There's not nearly as much dancing at SCA events as there once was. Either because there's, we're getting ready for court or feast or whatever. There's, so many other things that are going on now that, we don't make time at events for unbelted fighters to sit down and play a game of chess with somebody and to discuss heraldry with somebody and to do dance and to do all of these things. And so that's hard. And I think that's something that's something that is definitely a change in how we view that franchise over the last 20, 30 years.
It has become very busy, yes. And I agree with you. One way I've always described it is, you should be able to see someone across the field, and even if they're not wearing their regalia, it doesn't matter. You should be able to say that person's a knight or that person's a peer. You should be able to spot that. It's hard to quantify that. Why is that? Part of it is how they hold themselves, how they look. I'm not saying clothes make the man, but they should look, well put together, neat. And there's at least as far as the Knights and probably the MODs too, as far as their franchise, I think there's a certain physicality to it.
In fact, Robert, when I met one of your former squires, when I met Hansa,
right,
I met him at a New Year's Eve party at Stephen de Beckenham's house before West Kingdom 12th Night 99.
Okay.
Met him in mundane clothes in Steve's kitchen, and I thought he was a knight.
Yep.
He just carried himself as a knight, and didn't know till the next day that he wasn't. I would have no idea. I mean, but that's exactly what you're talking about. Is that's what you want, and that's when we recognize them, is when they carry themselves in a knightly manner all the time, no matter what their circumstances.
Exactly.
And he's done all right for himself.
Yeah, he's done a good.
So we had a couple things come up in the comments I want to bring back to you. We're having a great conversation, so I was trying not to stop it. You actually ended up answering one of the questions before I could actually ask it, which is the idea of why shouldn't there be a checklist? And you, I think, cleared that up pretty well. But a couple things I want to scroll back to here. There is a suggestion for a shirt that we need to make, apparently. Let us do nightly things. That's a t-shirt waiting to happen.
I've got a guy for that.
Yeah, so yes, I approve of that t-shirt getting made. I need merchandise. That sounds like a great thing to do. Well, let's talk about it offline. And then Her Highness of the Mists have asked us. So we talk about the sort of franchise as the total package, but are there subcategories under franchise? Are there sort of things we can talk about within that that we can address as part of that question? So we've mentioned so obviously we have eight shows that we're planning that are sort of all part of being a knight, right? Which is that only one of them is prowess, so the rest of them have to be franchise.
Pretty much.
Right. So that gives us our categories, I think. So we've talked about the courtly graces. We've talked about the looking the part. We've talked about the the teaching, things like that. Are there others we need to look at?
I'd say because in the West Kingdom,
the
last several years, instead of focusing on the checklist so much, we've gone more to talking about the virtues, the knightly virtues, and do they present those knightly virtues? I heard Sean mention in the previous one how franchise can be considered, a combination of all those other virtues, and I agree with that a lot. To me, the ones that really stand out, though, as part of franchise are courtesy. How do you deal with other human beings? It costs you nothing to be courteous. Humility, and that's not false humility or vainglory. You got to hit that in the middle somehow. And the third one would be largesse. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean physical giving of things a lot. To me, in the SCA, largesse is giving of yourself.
Right.
Do you give your time to people? Give your time to the kingdom, to your local group? Just volunteer for things, help out, do things. So all the other virtues are there in franchise in balance, but I think these ones really stand out as a big part of it. So.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was Robert that mentioned, that the idea that franchise is kind of the maybe it's the glue that holds the other virtues together, or maybe it's just a reflection of the harmony of those other virtues. Like everything, when you have the other virtues working together, you have franchise.
Right.
If that makes sense. So as far as subcategories go, we are. I say we've planned 8 episodes in this, and the last one is prowess, and even that episode is not so much of a how-to. Um, but yeah, we're going to be talking about gaming. We're going to be talking about the three legs of the peerage stool. Fighting arts and service. We're going to be talking about networking and cultivating relationships. Got a bunch. But yeah, we'll be talking about some of those things and how they all work together to build the night and looking the part. Kind of that. So sometimes the thing that somebody needs is just buying a decent helmet that just kind of completes their fighting outfit, their fighting harness, and where you get that helmet that finally makes you feel knightly. Rather than the $300-$400 bucket helmet that you could afford to get in the early days. Being able to get that dream helmet that you want that makes you feel like a knight, that that goes such a long way towards just being knightly, feeling knightly. Because there's that thing where one of the kind of litmus tests that we use sometimes is, when I look at a fighter, can I imagine what they look like with a white belt and a chain?
Right.
Like, can I see that person and say I can see them wearing the belt and chain, and how that would look on them, and just kind of envisioning how they carry themselves, and so yeah, there's a lot of things I think that all kind of work in harmony to create franchise as a greater concept.
So I want to tag off of that point. So you talked about the helmet, right? The helmet, sort of making you feel more knightly. I think that's a really interesting point, because a lot of people talk about, the idea that a good carpenter shouldn't blame his tools, right?
Right.
You mess up a table, it's not the tools, it's the carpenter. But it's also really hard to make a table when you don't have a hammer, right? Yeah. Or when your hammer is like a rubber mallet. Like there's at some point you have to have the right tools to do the job, right? So if you have a crappy helmet, okay, yeah, you can fight with a crappy helmet, but you're not going to fight as effectively. You're not going to be as good because you can't see as well, or you don't feel as good. I know I speak to helmets specifically because that's a problem I've had since day one of my fighting. Is helmets have been a bane of my existence because I have apparently a weird shaped head that nothing fits me correctly. And I know when I put on my helmet, I always I'm irritated, and I instantly, so I start the fight off mad because my helmet doesn't fit right.
Well, there's something wrong with it,
right?
And because of that, there ends up being something wrong with your fighting because it's not right.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a really great. It's like I said, I hate to blame the helmet. I hate to blame the shield. I don't want to blame the sword. But if your shield broke, it's hard not to.
Well, and that's one of the episodes we're doing is looking the part.
Right. And one thing I would say is, start small. Like I said, start with one piece and, have a picture in your mind of what you want to look like and work towards it.
Yeah.
One bit at a time. Though I will say that there was a Pennsic where Sir John Theophilus and I built a picnic table with a Swiss Army knife. No other tools. So you can do it. But from the get-go with me, I had this vision of, boy, if I get injured on the field and they take me to the emergency room and they start stripping the armor off, I want them to not find anything that's not period until they get down and look at my pouch and get my, my medical insurance card.
Right.
out of it. And so that's something I've striven for all the years. And again, it's been piece by piece. And I've had different time periods. You know, I was a Norman to start with. Then I went 14th century. Yeah. And a lot of that has been slow transitions. Like I said, you can start with one piece and a surcoat hides a multitude of sins.
Yep.
You get a good surcoat inexpensively. So if you get that helmet that fits and looks good, then the rest of it. If you have the problem that you have, Kal, I'd say you might have to save up and go to an armor.
Right.
Yeah. So make one that fits me. Yeah.
Hey, I have plans. Damn this pandemic, I have plans.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah,
So, oh, go ahead, John.
No, I was going to say that point that oh no, go ahead. I just totally lost my train of thought.
Fair enough. Okay. So earlier you mentioned that there weren't enough opportunities to show the. I think this deals a lot of the courtly graces, right? Talking about dancing and the gaming and the heraldry, right? But since that's a big part of franchise, I think we need to look at that. So a question came in. So if there are far fewer opportunities to show mastery of non-fighting skills at events, what are some other venues you might like to look to see gentles displaying the graces in franchise? So basically,
how do we fix it?
How do we fix it? Yeah.
So I think it like my opinion on this is that in a lot of respects, the SCA has become a victim of its own success in this particular regard, where, I mean, I remember the events that we used to have, you know, when I was a teenager, where there just was time for all of that.
Right.
And as things have gone on, I don't know exactly. Well, it wasn't a when. It was like the frog in the boiling water thing. So I don't. It's just something that's kind of happened over time, that events have changed, and there isn't time for that. And again, maybe it's because, and it's not because court goes so much longer, because I remember having some court still the wee hours of the morning, and we had to put a stop to that because nobody wanted that, you know. But I know a lot of it is, a lot of us aren't in our 20s anymore. And so, you know, finishing up an event and then going to a post-tribal afterwards is just exhausting. So there's not as much of that. But even at events, I think part of it is that the SCA has grown and expanded, and there are so many diverse efforts now that we're trying to fit all of them into the event.
Right.
I think that's part of our problem, and I mean, and there's some good and some bad to that. The bad is that, certainly for those aspiring to knightliness and the chivalry, the opportunities do not exist. Opportunities that kind of cater to them displaying knightly virtues.
Right.
Those don't exist in a vacuum. Where, you know, when we were doing dancing at events, that dancing was available to everybody. Right? It's not like it was just squires that were out there doing the dancing. It was available to everybody. But it was one of those things like, okay, now we're dancing, you know. And it was, you know, courtly dance was one of the easiest ways that a young squire could display any kind of social grace whatsoever. Right. It was one of the really easiest things you could do. Just go dance and just be polite in close contact with other people. Right. And it was one of the easiest things you could do to show that you were more than just a stick jock.
A lot of that used to happen Sundays at crowns and coronets, but you had a lot more time for that kind of thing on Sunday when you had a mundane nylon tent to drop down, throw the sleeping bag away. And now I've got the canvas tent. You have to let it dry. You got the whole camp to break down. It takes all day to break it down.
And those are definitely ways in which I think we've become a victim of our own success in that regard. But to answer the question, how do we fix it? We talked
in the West Kingdom, I think, that gives a venue for the up and coming squires, fighters, as it was. We have, I think some other kingdoms have a similar thing. We have the Queen's Guard, the Princess's Guard that are for unbelted fighters of worth, both heavy fighters, rapier fighters, archers. They all get tossed in.
Yeah.
And that is a venue because it is a service oriented thing because they are serving the crown or coronet, but also they usually they always pick a knight to be the knight counselor to help guide them. So when I've been the knight counselor, it's like, okay, these are the things we're going to do. At the upcoming crown or coronet, I remember one that actually I was on when I was a Queen's Guard. We told the populace they can come up and challenge a member of the guard to anything. It can be a fight. It can be a game of chess. It can be a dance, arm wrestling, whatever you want. You can challenge. So we're going to put ourselves on display and have ourselves out there. So it gives a venue for the young up and comers. So something like that, they're seen doing things and push them to do things as a unit. So.
Right, and I think since that venue is no longer kind of naturally created by the nature of the event, those opportunities don't exist. So you have to make them. You have to create those opportunities. Something we did in our last reign. So we have an augmentation to our Royal Guard that is our Chosen Seven. And the Chosen Seven to me are the people who are most on their path towards chivalry. They're not just hot fighters. They're doing some of these other things. They are people that we want to highlight. And there is more expected of our Chosen Seven than just simply being on the guard and kicking ass wherever they go. So one of the things that we did in this last reign was we asked all of our Chosen Seven, and we have a Knights Counselor for our Chosen Seven as well, which is a concept that I got from the West, because I think it's a great idea to have one of the revered knights of our kingdom to be able to say, you guys want to be knightly? These are knightly things to be doing, right? And kind of thinking outside the box. So one of the things that we did was we had each of our Chosen Seven pick a period game, and we told them that they had to play a game with the Knights of the Kingdom in the three major regions of our kingdom, north, south, and central-ish. And basically and this is something that any knight can do for their squire or any dependents or somebody that looks to you for guidance. There are knights that throughout the kingdom that your squire wants to get to know better. Just call them up and say, hey, my guy's going to be in your area. Can I have you spend half an hour, play a game, sit down and have a conversation?
Right.
And basically just do an interview, which is what we had our Chosen Seven do. Like, you each get like up to 5 questions. You play a game, you sit down for 30, 60 minutes or whatever, and just talk knightliness. And it was, again, that the opportunities that we need to display those things do not exist, and they have to be fabricated. And that's one way you can do that as a knight. You can easily call up one of the other knights and say, I got one of my squires coming to see you, and would you be kind enough to sit down and make some time for him?
Right.
So
you also made
I think it's a tangible thing we can do.
You also made a point about royalty too. I think the royalty can play a big role in this, and that's something that came up in the comments here. It says, what about bringing the need for certain display opportunities to local royalty? So I think this includes your baronages. One of the royal responsibilities is making sure the rest of us can play, right? That's part of the king and queen's job, is sort of facilitating the game.
Right.
So if we're seeing a lack of thing there, and I'll say this too, and this may be a Meridier's versus Artemis versus West thing, we have a lot of dancing here in Meridier's that is very not well attended. The dance is there, but nobody shows up, right? Because we have a fairly decent dance community. And that's one specific thing in this, right? And I'm working to get the gaming community up, so we have some of those things happening. But it's one of those things like the idea of if you build it, they will come isn't true. We've built it; it's there, but nobody's coming.
I think it needs a little more publicity, and that's where the royalty can come in. It's become fairly popular at our summer camping crowns and whatnot for the royalty to say, okay, after the fighting, after court, there'll be a potluck on the field. Everybody bring food, and we'll all share it. and it could easily be rolled into something like, or there'll be a party on the Eric on the list field after. It could easily be rolled into something like that, where they could say, okay, now we're dancing.
Right.
Or over in this corner, we've got games going on.
Right.
Yep. If people see other people doing it, they're more likely to join in. If it's off in a corner, off in another pavilion, another room, then people have to make an effort to go find it.
Right.
Yeah. And up in Kingdom of Vontier, they have what they call the Sergeant Trials.
Yeah.
The Sergeant Trials are baronial specific. So each barony holds their own Sergeant Trials, and those Sergeant Trials are that's basically all the things we're talking about. It is all the not fighting parts of being a knight, and you have to have submitted basically a package, and there is a trial basically where you have an opportunity to display your franchise and display your knightly virtues to the Baron and Baroness of whichever is sponsoring you as a sergeant. Right. And I think even that's not quite as prolific as it was in the 80s and 90s.
I'm going to say the 90s was its heyday, yeah. So.
Yeah, but it's still there. And I know Brian of Bellatrix
Yes.
out in the West is an on-tier sergeant. Before he
went up and passed.
Yeah, they went up there and did the test because it was another thing that they could do to show those things. And I think, like I said, those opportunities are no longer just readily available, and we have to make more opportunities to do those things, and we have to make those opportunities, and it's worth it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. When I say we have to make it, I'm not saying that as it's not a chore. But like I tell people that about fighting. If you want to be a really good fighter, the time that you have, if you're an adult with kids and a job, the time you have to be really good at what we do, that time does not exist.
Right.
You have to fabricate it. You have to carve it out of your schedule, and that's true of the knightly virtues and of franchise as well. Like we have to make a conscious effort to do those because those venues are not at ready use anymore.
Right.
Yeah, I also feel like there's fewer creative events now than there used to be in the past. Now they're all centered. It's a little war. It's a tournament. Yeah. You don't get events that showcase those other things. What springs immediately to my mind is the quest at Pennsic that they had a couple of many years ago, where they had you came in with a team, but they was not just fighting. It's like, right. Okay, to pass this part, there's a chessboard on the field. You've got to make the correct chess move to get the next clue. Or here's this arms hanging. To get the clue, you've got to blazon this arm correctly.
Right.
Yeah. So things like that. You don't see as many quests as you used to in the early days. Things that highlight the other aspects and other skills.
Well, and part of that too, again, is like us being a victim of our own success. When the Salt Lake City area was like kind of the only game in town, when we had the one barony that covered the greater Salt Lake metro area, I remember a time when we were like doing bids for events throughout the year, and we were only doing like once a month, but there were like competitive bids where people would say, I want to do a Japanese revel, or I want to do a come as you aren't revel, or like all these other various concepts that we do. Well, now we have within an hour of us either way, we've got another barony and two solid shire, well, one province and another shire, all within an hour of us. There's no time on the schedule for 4 groups within an hour and a half to have 12 events a year.
Right. Exactly. Our kingdom calendar is severely impacted. And they have actual kingdom law that says you can't have 2 events within, like you said, a certain distance of each other.
Yeah, several hundred miles. Yeah. And so we used to have those like those themed events that Robert was talking about. They used to happen, and people were excited about making their own themed event, and and they were lots of fun. And so one of the ones that we used to do in that was our Baroness's Champion. And our Baroness's Champion was basically Sergeant Trials. It was every year. It was an unbelted tourney. So it was for unbelted fighters only. And it was, there was a fighting component to it. But there was also an arts and sciences competition and a dancing competition and a gaming competition. There was a heraldry test. There was a test of general knowledge of just SCA, kingdom laws, customs and traditions, that sort of stuff, all in a day, right? All of these things were happening, and it was a big deal. It was something that as squires, we worked all year long to prepare for Baroness's Champion. And it was largely it was points based, right? I mean, it was you do well enough in a variety of different categories to determine who was going to be Baroness's Champion. And again, when you have one event a month that you're going to, you have 4 other weekends in a month to prepare for that sort of thing at that scale. And as time went on, with there being more events, when there's more events, there's less people showing up to all of them.
Right.
And so that kind of tapered off a little bit. And so we have done a couple of times. I've hosted a tournament of Knightly Virtues, which was based on that same tournament format. But again, that was something that we had to make that event happen. We had to find a weekend on our calendar to do it, where weekends that are not not consumed by your baronial's signature events that have been on the schedule for 30 years.
Right.
So it's harder and harder to find those things. We have to make those things happen.
So interesting thought I just had. So okay, obviously, being in quarantine, we've sort of found a new SCA, right? We found a new format for the SCA. We've had a lot of meetings move online. A lot of the things that take up time in events are moving online or have been done online. So the question that came in was, would the Shiv, and I'm not asking either of you to speak for the circle as a whole, but would the Shiv accept displays of this being franchised at local meetings or online as equally valuable? So basically, is there things we can do online between events, either through YouTube or through blogs or whatever? I know a lot of the artisans use blogs and websites to show off their prowess sort of over time, right? Their breadth and body of work. Is there something the fighting community and the knightly community can do in that same vein to show those other virtues and so the franchise in a different format than just at the events?
Absolutely. I would say, anything, especially if you are organizing something or you are putting yourself out there and saying, this is what I am doing, this is what I'm putting together, and participate actively in the other ones that are going on. There's so much going on at this point.
Right.
I've gotten to know people from the East Kingdom, from Australia, through Sir Leotold's 4:30 Pell time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a way they can show me too, I just through osmosis, what, their franchise, their dedication to this sport, the dedication to the SCA.
Right.
So it's, I think we've learned a lot in the pandemic, and some of it I hope sticks.
Right.
Coach's Corner is one of them. I listen to that usually Saturday morning. I listen to the recording of it. But certain things that are incredibly valuable and weren't there before the pandemic. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think in a lot of it, it's very difficult for us to display franchise online. Mm-hmm. But when we look at franchise as buy-in and ownership and kind of the stewardship of the society, maybe a concern for the well-being of the society as a whole, there are a lot of things that are happening online that knight candidates, people who want to be knightly, you can support those things that are easier to do online.
Right.
We had back in May, our kingdom did our Kingdom Arts and Sciences competition, all virtual.
Right.
It was all through Google Docs, and it worked really well. And again, it was, the necessity being the mother of invention. It was something that we hadn't really considered implementing on, certainly not on that scale.
Right.
And it worked really well. I had judged a couple of different pieces in that, and those pieces were submitted a week before the competition was happening. So I had a week to actually go through an online and read all the documentation, and to vet that documentation, and to look at the pictures and ask questions if I needed to. So I had a whole week to do that, instead of having to do how many things do I have to judge in an 8-hour period.
Right. You have 30 minutes to read this research paper. Go. Yeah.
At an event. And so we had plenty of time to do that. It worked brilliantly. It really did. And I hope we see a hybrid of that at some point, where, we can have those things submitted online, and then you go to the event and you actually get to see the thing, and you get to touch it, and you get to talk to the person about it a little bit more, and you can spend time talking to somebody about what they love doing, rather than spending time poring over the documentation and the object itself to evaluate it. And you can actually have a conversation with them about it. So those are some of the things. There are all sorts of things that are happening that do work well, because fighting online is kind of tough. I know Laetzel's been doing practice every day for 9 months now. Yep. I know Optimus Adis and Helgi are doing practice once a week at least. So there are some things that we can do there, but that gets into the prowess stuff, right? That gets into the fighting part of it. But we can't fight online. You can do spell work online, but you're fighting in a bubble. If maybe, I think I fought a total of 3 times in the last 9 months. We just can't do that online.
But right? You can focus on the other stuff and sort of. Yeah. So I'm actually going to disagree with the point you made. You said we can't show franchise online, or maybe we can't show it as well online. I think I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, because one of the points that y'all made earlier was part of that was it's being a citizen, right, and doing the sort of participating.
And that's really my greater point is we can show our franchise by supporting the things that can be done online. If somebody has an arts and sciences competition, you can be part of that. You can teach classes on subjects, you can even teach fighting classes if you want. There are things that we can do that support the other endeavors, and that gives us that buy-in, that gives us that concern for the well-being of the society as a whole, and that is innately.
Right.
Yeah.
And I will bring this up from Her Highness. Courtesy can also be shown online.
Yeah, certainly can, Your Highness. Yes.
We'll just in for a second. Courtesy. Right. So I think that's the best thing, is participate. So whether you're doing, obviously not everybody's sort of built to teach classes, or not everybody's capable of organizing a Zoom meeting, organizing a YouTube channel, right? However, there are people out there who will help you do that thing. Hi, this is an open offer to anyone watching out there that wants to participate more and do more stuff. One of my goals with this channel and sort of in general is helping other people participate and do things and show their stuff and do things. So if there's a thing you want to do, or you have a show you want to produce or whatever, let me know. I'm more than willing to help people do that, because that's one of my goals, is helping other people be active and enjoy what they're doing. Because I know that from a technical perspective, that's a lot of people's biggest hurdle right now is not knowing how to deal with the tech, right? We've had issues with accessibility for our hard of hearing community, and notice by now we do have an interpreter tonight that was requested earlier. It's been really weird watching myself talk, but that's been interesting for me.
And now Marie's like, "Oh wait, they're talking about me now."
Right. Yeah. But I know that the tech has been a lot of that, because Zoom meetings are hard for people who don't use computers, or if you have people that are still actively working and this is what they do all day, they don't want to also play on the computer too, right? And I get that. But there is some balance you've got to find of participating in your local group, doing something, or at least just showing up. Giving that 30 minutes, watching that person's class, because being someone who's done these shows, I've done a lot of shows, and I've taught a lot of classes. It really sucks to be sitting in a class with you and the moderator, and nobody shows up to it, right?
Yeah,
that sucks. And I get not every class is everybody's cup of tea, right? I've taught classes on some weird subjects that in weird times, because nobody wants to learn about who are the Scythians at 7:30 in the morning, especially when it's 8 o'clock my time and it's like 6 o'clock West Coast time. Nobody's going to show up for that. I get it, right? But when you can show up. Even if you don't actually care about the topic or don't actually want to participate in the scavenger hunt, right? Show up, participate, because somebody's put effort into doing that, and it really sucks when nobody shows up to participate. And that's, I think, a franchise thing that's a nightly quality is participating.
Yeah, like I said, that part of that franchise is a concern for the well-being of the populace and the society as a whole. And when you can't, fight, it can be hard. And again, especially being online, there are even fewer opportunities for you to display those things. And one of the easiest ways you can display your franchise is to support the community as a whole. Right. And you can definitely do that online.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've just over an hour now, so let's handle some last thoughts. So Robert, let you go first. Last thoughts on franchise.
As we've been saying all along, just don't pretend to be knightly. Be knightly. Just do it. Feel it. Find something you're passionate about. Follow that passion. It'll bleed through into other things, and it'll also lead down a path. I want to learn about this. So that leads me into this. That leads me into that. Follow that path. Be interested in the society. Be interested in the history. Be interested in the art, the artisans, the music. If you're not interested in that, why are you in a medieval recreation club?
Right. Yeah. You guys?
Do knightly things because they are knightly things to do. Don't do something for the sake of getting the belt chain and spurs. Do them because they are knightly things to do. I think that was one of the things that made my path a lot easier. I'd never felt like I had to do this to get the thing. I was very blessed in that my knight said, these are knightly things to do. And of course he was doing, Brian's a quad peer. He's a knight pelican laurel, royal peer. And so it was easy, seeing him doing the things, that certainly made things easier. But do them because they are knightly things to do. I never once felt like, oh, I have to do this thing so I can get knighted. That just never entered my consciousness. Do them because they're knightly things to do, and the trappings of state will kind of just fall into place. Because that is, and again, don't worry too much about your understanding what it means to be a knight as opposed to doing the things that knights do, because it starts with doing knightly things. And the idea of what it means to be a knight is a very personal thing that is eventually going to define your franchise of knighthood. It is going to be your own personal McDonald's where you decide what it means for you to be knightly.
I like that. So my final thought, I think the phrase that sums this up for me the best is be the example that you want to see.
Yep. Be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah, be the change you want to see in the world. I think that is the best thing for me, is be that knight that you want to see. Be that example you want to see. I think that is my sort of goal, and I think that's a great way to phrase it. All right, a couple things coming up, and then we'll do our sign-offs here. So we have, as always, I'm actually running 3 shows a week now, just about. So coming up Wednesday, we have What You Playing Wednesday. I'll be joined for Liar's Dice with my good friend, the crazy Westies from Between Two Peers, Ask the Knights Live, and their assorted friends. So we'll be playing Liar's Dice, 2 different versions. So first of all, if you didn't catch the last Dice episode with my Westie friends, go back and watch it. It was a blast. This one will be, I'm sure, just as ridiculous. We'll be joined by actually Fiken, who's been in the comments, will be helping me facilitate that one, because that is a game that requires some extra technology we're having to test out a little bit. Next Sunday, we have Coffee with Kal. We're talking with the Honorable Lady, patent pending, Katrina Yarborough. on volunteers and officership within the SCA. And then, of course, the following Sunday for the next episode of What Makes a Knight, we'll be talking about wanting it with Duke Quilliam. And that's going to be an interesting one. I'm really looking forward to seeing what we talk about with the idea of wanting the knighthood in that, whereas because it's in such a negative thing. But I'll be curious to see where we go with that.
It's a trap.
Fair enough. I will load up the Journal Akbar for that conversation.
It's a trap.
Sir Robert, thank you for joining us. This has been a blast. You have definitely lived up to your word fame, sir.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining me, Robert. I really appreciate it. Like I said, when we thought about this episode, you were absolutely the one person that I wanted to have on this particular episode. So thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Of course, thank you as always, Your Grace, for this show and the others we're planning. I'm looking forward to the rest of them. And I'd like to thank our Silent Herald Marie. She has done an amazing job keeping up with our fast talk.
Thank you so much.
So, guys, it has been a pleasure. Thank you all for joining us. We've had some great conversations in the chat here, and I'm looking forward to the rest of these series. Make sure you like, follow, comment, subscribe, do all those things. If you're interested in helping out Kalbar's Corner and KK Productions and all the shows that we produce here, and also the other channels that we sponsor, patreon.com/Kalbar's Corner. And the link for that is on the Facebook. Help us out. Sign up. There's also some cool things you can get in swag and stuff, and maybe T-shirts coming. We'll see.
Yeah, I got a thought on that. Let's do a follow up after.
Yeah, definitely. Because I need T-shirts. That sounds fun. So, anyways, guys, this has been. I'm Kal. We've been Kal, Sean, and Robert, and Marie, I guess, in Kalbar's Corner. Night, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.